Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I am so happy to have Amy Wilson with us. She is the author of the fabulous book of essays, Happy to Help, Adventures of a People Pleaser. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy Wilson is the author of the memoir, When Did I Get Like This? And the co-host of What Fresh Hell, a Webby-honored podcast. Amy is also an actor who has appeared on Broadway as a series regular on TV sitcoms and in films. She lives with her family in New York City, and this is the book, and I love the cover. It's just that pretty, bright, attention-getting red, and it's with Zibby Books. And we're going to get into it, Amy. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I love seeing all those Post-it notes. I mean, that does an author's heart good to see somebody has read their book that carefully. That's a big deal. Thank you.
It's the deep reading from my days as a magazine editor. And so Amy and I have a bit of a history. Back after I had left magazines and I was dealing with infertility, I switched careers and I went into medical education. It was a little bit calmer. I could leave at 5 o'clock, deal with my infertility treatments in the morning, and then be home to rest. And so I got out of publishing for a while. And I had my daughter. I was like doing freelance work, but I was out of publishing in a big way. I hadn't been there in quite a while. So when I wrote an essay about my daughter and how she danced at a library reading group, and then somebody told me it's like a spoken word show called Listen to Your Mother in New York City. Why don't you, if you wrote something, why don't you go speak? And I had always been a journalist, a magazine editor. I had never written really something deeply personal. So I wrote this essay and I went and I auditioned. And that changed my life. It literally changed my life because I thought I was a has-been. Nobody cared. In fact, when they asked me to tell my bio, I didn't say anything about having been a magazine editor-in-chief in the 90s and early aughts. I said I was a communications professional, which is what's in my bio. When I got into the inaugural production of Listen to Your Mother, I'm like tearing up because it's so
Oh,
meaningful to me.
me
I
too. Me too, Estelle. It changed so many lives, including my own. It launched so many partnerships and new careers and just belief that your words matter. It did it for so many people. And ours was just the New York show. It was at one point, it was in 27 cities all across the United States. And so it really did
this
launch 1,000 memoirs and other
it
things too.
was fantastic. And I want to say what your role was. Amy wasn't just in the performance, she was the director. She was my director. And I really admired your take charge persona and how you just kind of corralled all these disparate writers and people who had their stories to tell. And they said motherhood and all its permutations. It was such a wonderful, warm, experience. And not only that, it got me into blogging, which I never
Mm.
understood about. It got me connected to Blog Her, the Blog Her community. I reconnected with Jory Desjardins, who had written at iVillage and then had written for me when I was the magazine editor-in-chief of Wit, Women in Touch. And then I find out this person who had moved to California for an opportunity, and so she couldn't have lunch with me again, was in fact one of the co-founders of BlogHer. I don't know if you know that
No,
story.
I didn't. I didn't. How about that?
And so I've obviously followed Amy's stellar career, and I have her memoir. And I was so happy when I heard that she was doing a book with Zibby Books. Of course, Zibby Owens, who's been on the program and is such a force for writers and for authors and for the book community at large. So I went to one of Amy's launch events in the city, and we saw each other again, even though we'd been connected throughout the years, like we'd seen each other at different events. Maybe it was Mom 2.0, that was one
Hmm.
time. But first of all, I knew I had to read the book, and I loved the book, and I knew I wanted to have Amy on the program. So that's our slice of history.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. And I'm so proud of Listen to Your Mother too. And Imig, I'm going to give a shout out to her. She's the founder. And it's still licensable. You can, it's not still happening on a national organized scale in the same way. However, there are still Listen to Your Mother shows happening all around the country.
Yes, Anne is amazing, and I'm still in contact with Anne, and Anne's going to have to come on the show.
I
I
think
told
so.
her that. I even wrote about it in my book about what a transformation it was. And so thank you for that experience, and I'm so happy. And now we're going to talk all about your fabulous book.
Okay.
You're a people pleaser. You admit, or not recovering, but you know that this is a part of your persona,
Yeah,
right?
I mean the people pleaser thing, it's on the cover more than it's in the book. And I think people
Okay.
pleaser is what we call people who are like it was the best name we could come up with, right? For the subtitle. Happy
Okay.
to help. It's Confessions of a Blank, Adventures of a Blank. And we went around like, and people pleaser is like the closest thing, but it's not exactly it because I feel like in my life I was always very much motivated by being the protagonist, I think. Like, I alone can save this. Here I go. I'm going to ride to the rescue. The unfixable situation, not for long. Watch me. That, maybe there's a self centeredness involved there, but I always feel like it was more that than, oh no, is she mad at me? I was motivated more by like, I see other people being unhappy. I can fix this, everyone. And maybe that is people pleasing, but I think I've come to, after many conversations about, am I a people pleaser? Am I not? What does it mean? That it might be something slightly different.
When you were my director, I saw you as directive,
Right,
like,
right.
okay, everyone, here's the plan. But it was somebody taking charge. And I think
Right.
that's what you did, maybe. And then you picked up, I'm going to use the word slack because I know that was an original title for you,
Yes, it was.
right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I think people pleaser. I mean, it's kind of a pejorative term. It's certainly a term that women apply to themselves much more often than men. And I think it's what people are called when they finally speak up and say, "Hey, this can't keep going the same way. Like I'm struggling, I'm overwhelmed, I need help now." Then it's kind of put back on you like, "Well, you shouldn't have been such a people pleaser all this time." And it sounds like somebody who can't get out of her own way and can't get things done. And I think right, there's a lot of women like us who are accomplished, who do get a lot done, who do more than their share sometimes. And it's not because of a personality flaw necessarily. It's because that's what the world expects of us.
That's really interesting. So in my home life, I don't think I'm a people pleaser. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm like directive, like
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. In work life, I used to be very much like I had to do 135%, which is what you talk about doing.
Right. Right.
It's
That
this,
overachieving. Right. Right.
yes. And so it's interesting. You don't know what you don't know, right? So now you have the knowledge of having gone through, and maybe it started, you said, when you were in Catholic school. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a fascinating kind of genesis of where this came from.
Yeah, yeah. The moment when it all came together, the making of me moment at the beginning of the book is I'm in eighth grade. I went to parochial school where I was taught by many, many wonderful nuns and one who was very, very tough. named Sister Benedicta in the book, at least. She was tough on me in eighth grade. And I think she saw me as somebody who had a lot to offer, and she wasn't going to accept from me what I was starting to do in eighth grade, which was I wanted boys to like me. So maybe I'll stop raising my hand all the time because I'm getting the sense that I can be smart or boys can like me, but I can't be both. And so I started sort of dimming my own light. I think she was motivated by that. So one day in class, I decided I was going to stop raising my hand all the time. So I didn't raise my hand, even though I knew the answer. And it was some, grammar question. And she called on me anyway. And I did know the answer. And she said, "How dare you? How dare you not offer the answer when you know it? Do you think you're better than everyone?" Which was, of course, horrific because as a 13-year-old, all I was trying to do was prove that I didn't think I was better than anyone. Just wanted to, fade into the crowd. And she called me out and she, circled me with her red pencil and said, "You may not do that. You may not keep your hand down when you have something to offer." And like I said, I think she might have been motivated by, not letting me become a shrinking violet, but I'm not sure because it certainly, was an upsetting experience, but it did sort of train into me. You have to give everything you have to give at all times. You cannot opt out.
You took that sort of like adage
That's
and
right.
ran with it. And in fact, because I love to talk about structure, your book is structured by adages, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
things like, give it all you've got, stop before it's too late. You were made
Right.
for this. Can you talk a little bit about that part?
It was kind of an 11th hour edition, and it was a very inspired one. My editor at Zibby Books, Kathleen Harris, we were sort of, putting just like the last zhuzhes on it. The essays had different titles at that time, just titles that came out of what was in the essay. And she said, "I have this idea," because I had talked in the introduction about how people who do too much, helpers, when we kind of say, "Oh, can somebody else help me? Can somebody else do something for a change?" We're told that it's, again, our personal failings that have made things like this, our need to complicate things, our workaholism, our people pleasing, our perfectionism, and fix that, right? Go fix that. And then you're like, okay, that's another job, but okay, I guess I'll go fix it. And of course, that never works. And so each chapter is a title of the kind of advice you're given, such as never give up, in a chapter where the eventual lesson learned is that sometimes you have to give up. Sometimes something is never going to work and you need to stop. Or the only one you can change is you, when an essay that's really about, asking somebody else to change the limitations of this advice that women receive. And so we decided to reflect that in the titles of the essays.
I love that. And I think as a framing device, it works so well to kind of pull together this big picture of what you're trying to say with this book. Did it start during the pandemic, the germination of it? I know you had a health issue during the pandemic, and maybe
Right.
talk about that.
The book sort of, I mean, I've been kicking around this idea for a book for a while, but the idea that I had was sort of more of a parenting book. And then it took so long to happen. By the time it finally came to be, I thought, okay, parenting's part of it, but it can't be all of it. The book came together in early 2022, which sort of was the pandemic, right? We look back on that as like, no, the pandemic was 2020. No, in 2022, we still were canceling plans and staying home and testing all the time and really
Definitely.
disconnected from others. One of my kids had long COVID and was still very sick at that time. So I would say it was post pandemic for a lot of people, depending on where you live and your own circumstances. And for somebody like me living in New York City with a kid with long term ramifications, it still felt very much high pandemic.
Yeah. Then you have a lot of research elements to the book, right? It's stories, it's essays, but there is a lot of supportive research throughout in terms of loneliness, in terms of social, in terms of medical. Can you talk about how you kind of worked that all into it?
That was the work of the book, right? So I wrote the first draft, which took almost a year of work to write it. And it was nonfiction. So I sold a proposal and then, of course, had to write the book. So that took me about 10 months. And then it became clear after the publisher reviewed it that it needed a developmental edit, which I had never gone through this process before, but it was a wonderful process. I mean, a big one, a complicated and heavy lift one, but the book was definitely improved by it. But the thing that we were sort of setting out to fix with this developmental edit is it was funny stories and then all of a sudden it was a TED talk with some research. And so the first idea was like, well, just cut the research. And I really didn't want to. I was coming from the point of this seems nuts and this seems like something's not right here. And reader, you're not crazy when you feel that way. It actually is true that XYZ, and show that the research proves that whatever the issue is an issue. It's not in your head. So then the work of the developmental edit became, okay, well, how do we take these sort of would feel like two different books and make them one book? And that took a lot of work. And I hope it's successful in the end, but it was really about taking the research. Some of the research didn't need to be there, maybe, right? Some of the research was I was proving every point I made by quoting some other experts saying it. There are some times when maybe you saying it is enough. You don't need to back it up like you're in college. And then sometimes I did want to have research to back it up. And so then we had to sort of put it in the narrative of the character, who's me, right? The character in the essay going through this, hits this roadblock, and then I, in the moment, stumble on this research.
Oh, wait, let's slow that down. This is really interesting. So, whereas you might have had say something and then go, according to research by so and so,
Right.
you now made it part of your narrative. So,
Right.
as
Right.
I struggled with this idea, I started diving into Google. I'm just
Right.
making
Right.
this up. I'm
Exactly.
not quoting exactly.
Right. But like for an example, when one of the first essays in the book, I developed vitiligo, which is what Michael Jackson had, where your skin just starts bleaching out. Still don't know why I got it. I think I might have gotten it because I had a very early version of COVID that threw off some crazy sparks. So anyway, yes, in the moment, because it turned into like vitiligo is an autoimmune disorder, it's like, so just put it in the essay. So I said something like, I didn't understand what was happening, but I went home and do what I always do enough research to teach an intro level college course, made a joke. And then I was like, vitiligo is one of, okay. And so just that little bit made
Yeah.
it so it feels like you're not going out of the narrative. You're just doing what the character did next, which was go do research, which is truthfully how I live my life. I mean, as soon as I am faced with a challenge, I read everything I can about it, sometimes to the detriment of taking action, right? But that's how I roll. So it was easy because it was real to sort of put it in. This person
Yeah.
faces a challenge. What does she do? She reads a book about it.
I love that because it makes it very accessible because it's part of your journey. And as readers, we're following along on your journey with each essay, with the
Right.
different parts of your life that you're pulling into the book.
Right. Right. And it also makes sense because all through my life, I have been very prone to these ideas of like, there's a chapter about a book called Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much that I read that book. That came out in the 90s. So I was just sort of entering adulthood at that time. And that I would read a book like that and be like, oh, you're right. I'm a woman who does too much. I really have to stop doing that. I have to stop overdoing. And I'll never do that. When I'm a parent, I won't be a mom who does too much. And then, of course, cut to being a mom who completely overthinks everything out of fear or love. I was prone to those messages, and I did go looking for answers in books and podcasts and everywhere else.
Were you a snowplow mom? I remember writing a piece about that once that I was a snowplow. I just kind of dug in and
I mean, kind of. I just kind of feel like you damned if you do, damned if you don't when it comes to parenting, right? Somebody pointed out recently, this isn't in the book, but I thought it was fascinating that, like, how can we be both completely self absorbed parents who won't put our phones down and engage with our kids? We're too busy on Instagram all the time. And parents who are smothering our kids and paying them way too much attention. She's like, I got that message in two different email newsletters I received in the same day that I was paying not nearly enough attention to my kids and way, way, way too much attention to our kids. And I think if you try to, as I do, try to like live by like, you're right, I'm going to stop doing that, you'll drive yourself nuts.
I agree. And I love that you have in the book, like, you have value just by being you. It's not in the doing. And you have to remember that as I think
Right.
a woman today. If I just do nothing, I still have value.
Right. You have value. I talk about that in one of the chapters where
Yeah.
I talk about this idea that people say, well, my mother was a saint. And we all know what
Age
that means.
29. Yeah.
She put up with way too much from you. And she's just so wonderful. And that I hope my kids look back and think of me as somebody who was very impatient sometimes and really cranky sometimes and
Oh,
sang annoyingly in the car sometimes, right? That I wasn't always just this receptacle of their ill will, and I receive it all with grace and patience and open arms. I'm a real
yeah.
person.
I never want someone to say you're a saint. That's
Right.
so idealistic. That's not what I'm not a real flesh and blood person.
Right.
I get angry, I get frustrated, I cry.
That's
That's
human.
real.
Yeah. And I think this idea that, like, oh, my mom was a saint means that we all get to be messy and make mistakes, but not our mothers. Our mothers have to be this very special kind of human being.
It's so true. You point out in your book that your husband used to have a job as like a chief risk officer. And I thought about it and I thought, that's really her title.
Yes, that's right. The chief risk officer. Right. It's in the chapter about the pandemic that what a chief risk officer does at a business is they're supposed to sort of scan the horizon for anything that could be a threat to the business. And when he had that job, he was always like, I don't want this job for very long because every day that something bad doesn't happen, obviously takes you one day closer to the day when something bad could happen. And when it does, it'll be your fault because you were the chief risk officer. Even if what happened was a tsunami or something that you never could have necessarily predicted. And certainly the pandemic was that. That was the thing we didn't see coming.
Yeah.
And here I was taking care of my family and making sure everything would be okay and that they get into the right karate camp or whatever, right? And then this, what you don't know is coming is the pandemic.
I know my daughter was like getting set to go to sleepaway camp. And my friend called me and she's like, Estelle, there's going to be no sleepaway camp this summer.
Yeah, in that chapter I wrote about how like each step of the way, I mean really trying to re-enter that mindset of this is going to be fine. Like they overstate things, you know how it is. This must not really going to be what they say is happening and then like it's not going to take longer than 2 weeks. I'm really trying to remember how you felt then and not how you know now that you stayed home for 2 years more.
You had kids, they had some issues that you had to deal with, health issues.
Mhm.
And that really brings all your filling up the spaces, the empty spaces, because you're the adult, number one. You're seeing it as your responsibility, right? You needed to start building a more equitable situation in that way, which you did.
Right. You know, that moment in the hospital, if you've ever had a loved one in the hospital where they say like, "Okay, mom, it's going to be up to you, mom. You're going to be okay. We're going to be sending you home today, mom." They do that weird thing where they
Yeah.
don't bother to learn your name. They just call you mom. And I was so annoyed by that. And then I realized, oh, it's kind of an honorific. It is up to me. And again, you're not crazy. Like it is up to you. It happened to me more than once that I would have a kid that was hospitalized for something and then it
Yeah.
wouldn't be better yet. And they'd say, like, okay, you're going home today, mom. And you're like, what do you mean? How can I be in charge of this? I am not qualified. And yet you are, you're in
You are.
charge. And so you figure it out. And that makes you strong and powerful. That doesn't make you someone who makes things harder than they need to be and worries too much, right? And
Right.
needs to look on the bright side, all that stuff.
And eventually things resolved. You talk about in the book in different essays, but you had a situation where you were volunteering and they said to you something like, well, if you don't do it, we don't know who's going to do it. And it's like, well, what is that?
Right,
And
right. Really, who else is there? Right.
right, really, who else is there?
I've been very prey to that messaging over time. Yeah, somebody was asking me to do this, and like I'd ask somebody else because you're so busy. But really, who else is there? And I thought to myself, like, no, she can't
That's
do it. He
not
can't
a
do it. It is me.
compliment.
It's not a
Yeah.
compliment. You're right because they're assuming that your time is completely usable, even though they just said you were too busy. But it's also like not your problem. I think a lot of times when I was doing too much, and I thought, well, I need to hand some of this over as soon as somebody shows up to take it, right?
Yeah.
And just because there is no one else who's going to take on this thankless job doesn't
Yeah.
mean it has to be you. I think I was sort of like, well, I guess it does have to be me, so I'll do it. And I've done some interviews where people will say, and then you see, when you say you can't do it, somebody else does it. And then I like to live in the more complicated spaces of, or maybe not, or maybe the fundraiser gets canceled because nobody stepped up, or maybe something falls apart or doesn't happen or doesn't work anymore because you can't do it. And that's still not a reason to keep doing it if you need to stop.
Absolutely. My husband has a great saying, and he deals with teams of people, and he says, "Don't make your problem my problem."
Yeah,
Now, again, there's a partnership when you're in a marriage. So,
right.
in general, it could be a good adage to go by because if you're being looked at as like a dumping ground, so to speak, which is
Right.
a lot of what you talk about in some of these essays.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I could have taken to heart. Like their problem is not my problem, and I just see somebody who needs help. And again, I think this is mostly a good thing in people to be altruistic, to care about other people. And when you're a parent, to put other people's wants and needs before your own is kind of the job assignment. I have a lot of sleepless nights to show for it. And yet, you can find yourself over applying it. So it doesn't mean that there aren't places where you need to learn to set boundaries. Setting healthier boundaries. I've been thinking about that recently. The idea that your boundary has to be healthy before it can be set. Because then that's what I would do. I would go like listen to 800 podcast episodes on setting healthy boundaries and not set the boundary because it has to be healthy first. I get stuck in the when I'm ready to do it perfectly, then I'll begin.
So how did the perfectionism play into like the writing of the book? How did you finally let it go?
I mean, this book went through a lot of edits because it had been bought on proposal and then it
Mhm.
went through the developmental edit. It really went through a lot of permutations. I probably thought it was done before some other people thought it was done, to be honest. And yet still when that moment comes, you're like, oh, let me just look one more time. And it's an interesting experiment. I did the audiobook maybe 6 weeks before the book came out and we found errors. You can't believe it that after a copy editor and another copy editor, you've read this thing 800 times. And then as we were actually going through reading every word, we just found, oh, just words repeated, small mistakes. But
Right.
still, it's hard to believe after you have worked for years to make it perfect that somehow you still find these small mistakes. And it was too late. The book was gone to print. And so making peace with that. That was the perfect sort of forced exposure therapy for
And I bet
perfection.
no one noticed it except for you,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but it's in your head. I totally get it. You also kind of honed your teeth on growing up on these teen magazines that said,
Yeah.
solve your boy probs or get him to notice you. I love that one. It's kind of, again, the work is on you.
Yes, I used to read Young Miss. It came every month in the mail, and then
Yes.
17 was the number one competitor for that. The
Yes.
work is on you. And when I really went back and looked at these magazines, because of course I was like, oh, I have to get everyone on eBay and read them all, there would be a sort of a like fix your figure probs, and there'd be a quiz, and you could decide if you were a pleasingly plump Paula or a skinny Minnie or you were this, but there was no option in which it's like, I love my body as it is.
I wrote those quizzes for 17 and for
Oh
teen.
my
Yeah,
gosh. And I mean, it wasn't just in those magazines. It was at the time, like, there's something wrong with you. You just have to figure out what it is, and then
yes,
you can work on that. Instead of like,
yes.
stop driving yourself nuts trying to lose 10 pounds. Like, why are you doing that? Right. Or why are you trying to get somebody to notice you who doesn't like you? It's okay. Just
Yeah. Keep
move your
the
attention
guy, these
elsewhere.
strategies, turn him
Yeah.
on, keep him
Yeah.
by
And the,
doing this. Oh, yeah.
in the women's magazines I used to read, my mom would bring home magazines from the supermarket. And I was an early and voracious reader, and there were no cell phones. So I read everything I could get my hands on. So, anyway, the women's magazines, there would be different advice columns. It was in one of the major women's magazines, there was a column monthly. It was called Can This Marriage Be Saved? And I'm learning now as an adult, they make up a lot of these letters you read in, but somebody would write in and say, my husband, he flirts with the other ladies at church and, it hurts my feelings. And the answer would always be some form of, can you try to let it not bother you? Can you develop a sense of humor about it? Because, divorce was just a total last resort. Broken home would be terrible. And the fix was just always like, just don't let it bother you so much. So I internalized that too as a 10-year-old. I mean, while I was stroking my chin, deciding if their marriage could be saved or not as like a grade schooler. What I really took away was like, it's up to you. You have to change your attitude about it. He's not going to change. So you have to change yourself, which I don't think is always the right answer.
There's a chapter in your book that I just absolutely love, and it's the skiing chapter.
Oh, yeah.
I can completely relate. And, it's really you trying to go along with something for the sake of family. So, can you talk
hmm
a little bit about that?
So I never learned to ski growing up. My husband did. And when our kids were 7, 5, and 3, he said, they're old enough now. Let's take them to ski. We'll have fun together. To make a long story short, I went on the bunny slope by myself while he was taking my first grader and teaching him how to ski. And I went down the bunny slope like 10 times. Like, this is easy. There's no problem here. And then my husband said, okay, you're ready for a real hill. And he took me to the top of a green run, which are like allegedly easy hills, but they're easy if you know how to stop or turn, two things I had no idea how to do. I had just sort of like barreled down the bunny slope a few times and thought that I knew how to ski. I was the most scared I have ever been in my life getting down this green run with no idea how to ski. I would go downhill super fast and then dump over to the side, and then he'd have to help me get up, and I'd yell at him it was his fault. And my little boy who did know how to ski had gotten to the bottom of the hill. So that was what was really fueling my panic, was that our 7-year-old was down there by himself, and it was taking me to like 25 minutes to get down the mountain because I didn't know what I was doing. And yet, even after that experience, I'm like, well, I'm not doing that anymore. And my husband said, oh, you can't quit now. You'll see. And I mean, he was only trying to be supportive, but him saying, well, you can't quit now totally overweighed anything in my own head. Like, I hated that and I'll never do it again. And so the essay is about me trying and trying again and trying again and getting a teacher and having people laugh at me and just thinking I can't quit because then my kids will see me quit and then they'll think you can quit things. And so I have to keep going. And eventually, what I learned was that I could just stop. I hated it and I was always going to hate it. And I stopped. And guess what? My kids still ski and they enjoy it and they don't really care that I don't. And it's fine to stop doing things that you hate. And that was the lesson that I learned, not that like I'm going to keep doing this. And if I don't give up, I'll see things through. In that case, that was definitely not what I was supposed to do.
It's kind of like you were a victim of your own resilience. You're so
Right.
resilient and focused, right? And goal-oriented that, back then you were like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep doing this. I'm going to keep, and if somebody says something that's a little bit that I can take it as encouraging, I'll do. And for me, it's interesting because my daughter and my husband both ski. They're fantastic skiers and they like to go west skiing because
Mm.
powder, the
They can
whole
go in
thing.
the trees. Right.
The
Right.
trees. And I don't ski. I tried it. I was not good at it. I don't like being too cold. I don't like being wet. I can't snow plow. I scream. I'm like so nervous. It's like no good. So I just said, when people ask me, I say, I don't ski, I spa. That's all. I just go get a massage and read my books, write. It's okay. Because if I'm going to force myself to do it, then no one's going to be happy. you know,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a valuable lesson. I realized like modeling that you don't have to keep doing something you hate, that was also a worthy lesson for my kids to learn from me. Yeah. And I look back at that now. Really, I kept going because my husband said, you can do it. You have to keep going. And then I stopped because finally one night he was like, well, I mean, if you hate it, you don't have to keep doing it anymore. And I was immediately like, I don't. And I never went again. And it makes it sound like we have this completely, dictatorship of a relationship. We don't. It's just that I think I look for permission from other people to stop or give up instead of knowing in myself when it's okay.
So you got the feeling that it's all in you. Now you have the control, right? And
Right.
what do you think that pivotal moment was that really gave you that insight?
I think it was working on this book, to be totally honest with you, because I needed to have the lesson. So, what are you supposed to do instead? So, how did you know? And I thought, like, I don't know. I'm working on this. I started writing this book almost by accident. As you said before, the title was going to be Slack. And the idea was the times when I pick up the slack for other people, when other people give me slack, and then when I had to pick up the slack, times that I had to work harder than I worked. So, I was whiteboarding this and I could not think of anything to go in the column of I needed to pick up the slack. I needed to try harder. I couldn't think of any time that I hadn't tried harder. I could think of many times when I had tried too hard and stayed too long and stayed with the boyfriend who kept cheating on me and stayed in the job that was a thankless dead end job. I mean, like that column's full. Why is this one empty? And that's when I realized that was what the book was about. But it
Wow.
was really through, you write the book that you need to read, right? So I was really through engaging with this. Why do I over deliver? Why do I think that I can't stop until everybody else around me has their problems fixed? They didn't ask me to do that. And I never stopped to think about it until working on this book.
That is so interesting. And there's something we also have to talk about. I mean, you've been somebody who's pivoted from
Yeah.
different careers. You've been an actor on series. You've done so much. And, Hollywood is a bit of a cutthroat industry. And you talk about that in your book, in some of the essays and some of the things that you dealt with. And I'm sure there's even more that
Oh, yeah, there's more.
you say.
Yeah, and I'm honestly glad to not be doing it anymore because the idea that you have to look like beautiful and young while you're walking down the street is
Well,
it's
you
something that gets harder
do.
and harder. I mean, I do. I look amazing, but you know what I'm saying. It
Yes,
gets
I know. I
harder
know.
and harder. And here I was, on a sitcom being assessed for not being pretty enough and being found wanting. And I knew it wasn't a place where I was happy, but again, the way that TV shows worked then, I think still work this way, is that when you get down to be the last one or two people before they cast you, they make you sign away the next 7 years of your life for a TV show in case it's a big hit TV show. They don't want to renegotiate your contract in season 2 of Friends, right? So they lock you down ahead of time. They can fire you whenever they want for whatever reason, but you can't leave. So it was a perfect example where it's like, I'm not making this up. I have signed a contract. I'm not allowed to quit. I signed something saying I wouldn't. Of course, when I look back now, I'm like, I think they probably would have let me out of my contract because they clearly didn't really like me or want me there. We were stuck with each other. But in that moment, I'm like, I have to make this work, even though I can tell it's not working. It's tough. Not everything in Hollywood is like that, but that experience was.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And so you navigated that. And then you were an early adopter for podcasting, Amy.
Yeah, yeah. It's 2016. That's thanks to my co-host, Margaret Ables, who, again, I mean, she and I had connected and reconnected over the years. We did listen to one of the Listen to Your Mothers she was in New York. And that was right when we had become friendly again and was through working on Listen to Your Mother. She said, I think we should try a podcast together. What do you think of that? And I had just sort of put the wish out into the universe that I would have a new, fun, collaborative, creative project to work on with a woman. I'd worked on something with a guy that it just was, I was doing 80% of the work for 20% of the glory. I'm like, I'm going to work with a woman this time. And then she came to me, would you like to try doing a podcast? So I just said yes. And now, it's 9 years later, we're still doing it. So sometimes the right thing comes along.
Fantastic. And you've won so many awards, and it's such a wide audience. And it's interesting because you also have kind of combined your performance experience by taking your podcast on the road as a
Yep.
show. And
Yep.
can you speak to that? And also, do you have plans to take this book on the road?
Yes, I have been a comedy performer, and my co host Margaret also came from TV comedy, more on the writing side, but she is a very funny performer. And so we do sort of a live version of the podcast that we take around the country, and we really love it. We're not going to get rich doing those shows, but they are so fun for us. And it really does sort of scratch that itch. And it is so fun to see groups of women, men can come too, but it's usually women who show up with their friends and they're just having the time of their lives. And we love doing that. The book, I've been doing some speaking engagements, and you're right, it's all of a piece. Everything I've done, sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm a dabbler who's dabbled in different things, but really and truly, like the writing feeds, the podcasting feeds, the performing, it all kind of becomes, one thing that I'm interested in. And what I love about podcasting is that you connect with your audience, right? You make your stuff and you ship it. Being on a TV show, you have to audition for 100 and then hope you get it and then hope it works, then hope anybody watches. And when it hits, it's wonderful, but the runway is so long. And these days, between Substacks and podcasts and things like that, there's a lot of ways to create content and reach an audience that aren't waiting for some gatekeeper to approve.
It takes the middleman out. There's
Yeah.
no middleman.
And I
It's
love
like
that.
you, the audience.
Yeah. And Instagram and TikTok, I mean, the incredibly creative content that's being made on all these platforms is what happens when people can just find their audience.
I love that. And so, what do you most want women who do too much, women who think too much, women who worry too much, mothers, everybody dealing? What do you want them to take away most from this book?
That when your life feels overwhelming and like you're struggling, it's because the situation you're in is really, really hard. Not because there's something wrong with you, not because there's something you need to fix about yourself so that the situation will get easier. Like, fix the situation, maybe, get more help, demand it, but don't be like, oh, I need to stop being such a people pleaser. And as soon as I figure that out, then I'll have more time on my schedule. It just gives you more homework and takes you further away from the change that you need.
And it makes me think about business because they say when there are issues in business, you should say it's our process that we have a problem with, and let's fix the process. And then so it's the onus is not on the people. And
Yeah.
it's almost like if we can apply that concept that men very cavalierly use all the time, we could use it.
I think that's right. I mean, it's a very feminine thing. I think it's something that's put upon us. And I also think it's something that we accept. My husband's the same age as me. He didn't grow up reading magazines about how to fix his figure problems and get girls to notice him, all the things he had to fix about himself before he was worthy. I don't think men move through life that way or are told to in the way
Right?
that women are.
So what's next for you? I mean, I know your book just came out, so you
Yeah.
have a lot going on with the book. And
But that's what they say. You got to move on to the next one. So the podcast is still going. And so we're still doing episodes every week. So that kept me very busy, including the book launch. It kept me just moving forward and doing the next thing. So, really getting the book out in the world, doing some speaking engagements, which are, if you go to amywilson.com, I keep my events updated on there. And then the next book, I think I have an idea. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I'm like a maypole of an idea. I'm wandering around right now.
would it be nonfiction? Would it be novel?
I have tried to write a novel and learned a lot from it. And I might have learned that I'm not a fiction writer. We just all have different things, right? Like, I mean, I
Right.
talked to Jennifer Egan once and she said, I don't know how you write personal essays. That just seems so difficult. Jennifer Egan. And I'm like, I don't know how you write fiction. I get the essay. I like the essay. I like being funny. And so I think that I'm completely out of stories about myself, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll see.
I just want to end with on page 251, you have a great quote to end in the chapter, It Has to Be You. It says, "We are worthy even when we are unsure, when we sit together with things that are imperfect and broken and hard, between the inhale and the exhale, in the moment just before something else happens next." It's just that space between things. I think Deepak Chopra said something like that once. And that's where, we're still okay. We're good. We're worthy. And I
We're
love that.
worthy. That's right. We're worthy when we don't know what's supposed to happen next, which was a very hard lesson for me to learn
Powerful. How did you decide to end with that? What was the decision? Because it's so powerful.
because it's the cure. It is it's like, how do you stop and how do you do? It's like, okay, then here's what you do. You say, I don't think I'll be able to do this anymore, or this year, or this, I'm going to need more help. And then there's this moment of silence that follows that is not rejection. It's just sort of confusion. Everybody's sort of resetting, like, wait, did she just say she can't do this anymore? Right. And in that moment, I've often in the past rushed in to say, I mean, maybe I could do it one more time, or I could be the vice chair, and maybe I guess I could do Thanksgiving one more year. And then I do that. I take it back because that silence of not knowing what's going to happen next feels so scary. And when I realized that you could instead just let it be scary and let it be weird and just count to 10, that really something else does happen next. That's
And
really what changed for me.
I think we all need to hear that,
Yeah.
Amy. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing this in your book. Happy to help. Adventures of a People Pleaser, Essays by Amy Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Estelle.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.